Follow Johnny Loaf on Twitter. He does all my cool art in the thumbnails and stuff. Okay, let's move. The silencing effect is really good if there are enemies and parts of the game you just don't want to fool with or aggro, like the Albinauric archers in Ordina Evergaol. Barbaric Roar can change the animation of some heavy attacks on axes, making them more powerful or hit multiple times. It also stacks with the Axe Talisman and the Spiked Cracked tier for massive damage. Use Barrage with status inflicting ammo like St. Trina's, Rot Bones, or Spirit Flame arrows to proc status effects really quickly. The uptime of this skill has dropped a little bit thanks to recent nerfs, but I don't think it's meant to be used all the time. It's still great for guarding otherwise unblockable attacks like Malenia's Waterfowl. If your Dragonborn cosplay is lacking, you can throw this on with the Roar Medallion, get a Keen Affinity weapon, and then throttle up your dex, and you can have this Ash of War doing some pretty impressive damage. You can cancel the final slam attack by dodging at the last second if an enemy poises through it to avoid taking damage. Bloodblade eats up a small amount of HP upon use, so it's most efficient when paired with something like Taker's Cameo. If you're recharging HP with a Blasphemous Blade, put this on a lightweight dagger, and you can probably equip both at the same time with no movement penalty due to your equip load. Usable on arms capable of thrusting doesn't mean only thrusting swords. Any weapon that has a thrust attack, you can throw this on. Great swords, great spears, halberds, and even katanas. With a generous FP consumption, you can use this to just zip out of any danger, like, immediately. It pretty much trivializes Malenia's Waterfowl down to gesture status, and it's probably one of the only ways to reliably escape it if she winds it up when you're right under her. Bloody Slash is extra efficient with katanas and other weapons that come with blood loss effects. It can ravage your HP if you aren't careful, but the FP consumption is pretty lenient, especially useful in the early game while the enemies are weak asses. Braggart's Roar should be primarily treated as a weapon buff, as it can be stacked with other character buffs like Blood Boil or Golden Vowel, and will override any greases or other weapon buffs you currently have on. This can be paired with both Godfrey Icon and the Shard of Alexander since it's both a weapon skill and chargeable. The Carian Retaliation spell has its own applications, but when you place the Ash of War variant on a shield, it actually gives your parry much more active frames than what a regular parry would really give you, which makes it especially good on medium shields. Incompatible with Godfrey Icon because holding L2 only extends the distance of the charge without giving it extra damage. It does, however, synergize with Rotten Winged Sword because charging at point blank will hit enemies multiple times. You can also free aim or guide it during the animation pretty easily. Procs Frostbite on the dragons in Northeast Caelid almost instantly. Put it on a katana and the frost buff afterwards will enable both frost and bleed damage in a single swing. Congratulations, dick. This is that one weapon skill you see Radahn use against you in his fight. Boost physical damage by around 10% and poise damage by probably more than that. I like using this on daggers and short swords because most heavy weapons would normally chew through enemy poise anyways, and it also breaks down crystallians like rock candy, so there's that. Some people actually prefer this over RKR due to its generous FP consumption. It's still a 60% damage increase for your very next attack, so it's no joke when you use it early game. It really shines on strength builds and can be paired with a Claw Talisman to make your jumping heavies even better. Double Slash is in fact not 2 slashes, but 6 in total. It has 2 follow-up attacks. Put this on a katana and spice it up with Bloodflame Blade and voila! Rivers of blood at home. Earthshaker has many similarities to Waves of Darkness in its attack animation, but its main advantage over Waves is the follow-up R2 that actually has a functioning fucking hitbox. Use the first hit to break the guard of a great shield enemy, leaving them open to receive the full damage of the follow-up. Put this Ash on a horn bow and use Dwelling Arrows for bonus damage, and you've got yourself a surprisingly capable bow strategy. This was the Ash that showed me the chariots in the heroes' graves actually weren't insta-kills and just did a lot of damage. If you took a wrong turn and now you're being trailed by one of these things, popping Endure right before they hit you can give you a surviving chance if your vigor is high enough. Of course, good against hands. Also really useful against large enemies that tend not to move around that much, like dragons or giants. Instead of trying to tell you how you can stance break Placidus Axe in X amount of hits, I'm just gonna say this can also trivialize Crystallians and peace out. This one's too powerful to need a tip. Flaming Strike can be put on heavier weapons like Great Axes or Great Hammers to give you a reliable quick attack option where attacking normally may not give you the speed you need. Giant Hunt deals thrust damage, meaning the Spear Talisman can up its power by 15% if the blow is a counterattack. If the long windup has given you trouble timing a counterattack, just catch the enemy in the middle of a long-ass combo or something and you'll probably get the extra 15%. I've already said in the sorceries video how much I love Phalanx spells due to their stopping power versus faster enemies and bosses, but the skill variant allows you to chain this into a thrusting heavy similar to the Glintstone Pebble skill, which only makes the stance break potential even more than it already was. The Pebble part of the skill is very capable of staggering even large knights, setting them up for the following thrust. Shielded enemies leave themselves open to magic damage, and the thrust part of the skill will almost always knock them out of their defensive stance, so just because you see a knight shielding doesn't mean he won't take damage from it. This skill honestly has so much going on with it that it can be used for anything. The initial slam can do holy damage, break stances and whatnot, and the darts that spawn after the slam can force enemy dodges and can even proc on-hit status effects given to the original weapon. If you cast Blood Flame Blade and then use this skill, the darts will build up blood loss on whatever it hits. What the shit. I really like putting parry skills on medium shields because they receive a huge amount of active frames during the actual parry, while keeping the often superior damage absorption that medium shields give you. It's also extremely easy to parry thrust attacks because this skill gives your parry a slight range boost. You can parry your own spells with this. I'm not kidding. You can parry Discus of Light on its way back to you and launch a projectile, effectively giving you a 3-hit holy damage combo in one spell. Great hyper armor and the poise damage make short work of any Crystallians you run into. The skill variant isn't much compared to its big brother Incantation, but it can be picked up very early due to the knight the skill is attached to, and it's not held back by a high faith requirement, meaning you can use this as a great substitute for the early game. You can cast offensive spells with delayed or lingering damage like Roiling Magma, and then use Gravitas to bring enemies into its effective range. If an invisible black knife assassin has evaded your attention, just pop this and you're guaranteed to score a hit. I like using this in duo fights a lot because the range goes a lot further than it looks, meaning you can wind it up from pretty far away and it'll still stagger just about anything, so you don't have to worry about getting attacked out of the skill or anything. Not even a Sledgehammer nerf can knock this skill out of S tier for me. It applies insane frostbite buildup, and the nice 10 FP cost gives you a great option for elemental damage without plugging too much into mind. The longer windup is kinda bothersome versus bosses, but once it's out, slower enemies won't avoid it, and faster enemies might even run into it when you're casting it. Put this on a shitty weapon you don't plan to use or upgrade, and summon your Mimic with only this equipped. Once it's out, you can re-equip your preferred loadout, and the Mimic still keeps the weapon you gave it. It'll cast Holy Ground pretty frequently, so all you have to do is pay attention to where the radius is. This is also a great way to use the Mimic summon without it feeling cheesy or overpowered. The spinning animation you do prior to the actual projectile has its own attack hitbox with damage, and it can even ignore shields, so casting it point blank in an enemy's face plus the stance damage from the projectile can break the stance of some large enemies in a single motion. Bait out attacks from easy to read enemies and use Impaling Thrust right after their attack goes through. If you have a Spear Talisman, you'll get a 15% attack bonus for counterattacks. Put this skill on daggers with high critical modifiers like the Misericord and kick the shit out of things until their stance breaks. Lifesteal Fist heals for 30% of your max HP while only using up 14 FP, which is one of the best trades I think you can possibly take. If you're exploring sewers or catacombs and running low on health, grab one of those zombie fucks and just use them as a recharge station. You can be knocked out of this without good poise, so pop Lead and Heart here to ensure this doesn't happen, and use Rotten Wingsword to take advantage of successive attacks. This is basically a shittier Flaming Strike. The lightning is really hard to hit with, considering it strikes directly at your feet, but it still has that lightning AoE effect if you're standing in water, scoring a direct hit on an unaware enemy, and you'll get 3 damage bursts in one. Use to close distance immediately after a long-ranged enemy attacks you. If you're having trouble getting this to hit, either stealth up to a clump of enemies and attack them there, or try and free aim the second hit slightly to the right, and chances are you'll find your hits connecting with smaller enemies much more often. Against horseback enemies, Mighty Shot stops the whole enemy, including the horse, in their tracks. The base parry isn't too exciting, but the buckler parry has way more active frames, so I would suggest just using that one. You can sometimes zip past your target if you use this while too close. If you're sprinting to the side while locked on, you can still send the phantom forward towards your target while the momentum of the attack carries you in the direction you're sprinting, potentially evading another attack. This can be put on pole arms to further increase the range of the attack. Also really useful in catacombs, caves, and other tight spaces where weapon attacks are prone to deflecting off walls. Better than both poison armament and mist in terms of actually proccing a status effect, making it really useful with the Kindred Exaltation talisman. Poisonous mist is usable on most melee weapons and even heavier weapons like great axes and great hammers. Both the strike and the mist have the poison effect attached to it, making it preferable in close range since you'll be hitting the enemy with poison twice. Stealth around with Concealing Veil and Assassin's Approach if you're low health, and pop this on unsuspecting enemies to heal. Put this on a hammer so enemies poise break much easier, so they won't be allowed to even play the game and you can dispatch them quickly. When combined with the healing effect on Great Stars, continuing the charge can allow you to heal quite a bit from vulnerable enemies. Quickstep. Step quickly, preferably away from danger. Rain of Arrows can shoot multiple arrows at the price of one, so if you're low on stock, you can always use this to save what you have. The attack you execute after this activates can be boosted by Claw Talisman and Raptor's Black Feathers, since it's technically a jump attack. You can also use the lowered hitbox positioning to duck under certain attacks. Rotten Wing Sword, Blood Flame Blade, Lord of Blood Exaltation. I don't know what enemy this tip is for, but it's probably dead. Fire this at skeletons to prevent them from reviving. Like most holy damage, it prevents skeletons from self-resurrecting, and it's good against Tibia Mariners. But even though this ash is dropped by a Scarab in the Altus Plateau, you can get this much earlier in Liurnia by picking up the Tree Spear, its default skill being Sacred Order. Yes, we all know Lord of Blood Exaltation stacks with this, but Seppuku also increases your ability to inflict blood loss on enemies. So if you have a rapid attack option like the Pulley Crossbow, you can use Bird Bolts to proc bleed even faster than you normally would. Shared Order is for when you summon someone and you want to make sure they have the same buff you do. If you're playing alone, it's basically just Sacred Order. Don't confuse the two because you'll just waste extra FP. Great for interrupting attacks or shoving shit off cliffs. Combined with offensive spells to take advantage of your enemy being open more often. This is great against multiple large knights because spawning glint blades, for example, can easily keep one enemy at bay while you're busy harassing another. Against unaware foes, you can launch this up in the air and take advantage of the delay by comboing it with another attack of your choice. Doing this can proc status ailments almost instantly depending on how potent the attacks in question are. Poor damage, but pretty amazing posture damage, even when the target is decently far away. If you hit larger targets in the head, there's a good chance they'll just fall over immediately. Even with no FP, you can still stunlock certain enemies and proc bleed just like you would normally. Like seriously, there's almost no difference. It's kind of funny. This is also the default skill on a lot of halberds and other polearms, whereas at DS3 it was only found on curved swords. This gives you much more range and even a bit of elevation that can be enough to take out low-flying birds. Great with Rotten Wing Sword. Even better with Rotten Wing Sword due to the amount of hits. You can also use this to proc status effects extremely quickly. Use the strong thrust attack to knock enemies off their mounts. Just don't use it. It's just bad. Put this on a colossal weapon and break the stance of Titans. Actually not a bad choice in the early game. It does exceptional damage, and if you can stagger an enemy with the first gust of wind, the second one will undoubtedly hit as well. This is what's known as a true combo. Stormblade shares many qualities with Beast's Roar, but the requirement for getting this one is simply talking to Bernal instead of collecting Deathroot, and getting it early game makes it extremely viable against all the birds waiting for you in Stormveil. Storm Stomp comes out quickly and has one of the shortest recovery times of any weapon skill. Great for managing attacks against multiple enemies, and if something is about to attack you, just pop this out to throw enemies off their rhythm and respond with a couple of your own. The 9 startup frames of Stormwall make it unideal for parrying, but it can deflect physical projectiles similar to how Godric's Stormwall can deflect arrows and bolts. You can deflect the explosive bolts from pages and other physical damage types like some of Gerank's projectiles during the Malekith fight. Ideal for slashing through crowds of low HP enemies and also blocking physical projectiles, even though the description doesn't say that it does for some reason. But it totally does. Putting Sword Dance on a heavier weapon like a scythe or a great axe can give you a quick attack option on the first input without compromising damage. While Carian Retaliation only excels at blocking a single magic projectile, Top's Barrier is useful against multiple magical projectiles at once. Makes your bow penetrate through enemies. Great for duo fights. Thunderbolt scales off of dexterity, so although it grants the lightning affinity, you're better off switching to the keen affinity to get more damage out of it. Ow. Ow. Fire. Stop. Ow. The Unsheath skill in Elden Ring behaves a little differently than in DS3, mainly in the fact that it slides you forward a little bit, so you can use to close distance after a highly telegraphed attack from an enemy. Vacuum Slice can penetrate enemies, making it great against pretty much any duo fight that involves fighting two large targets. Another hard counter to those one-hit grab-ass attacks most endgame bosses will try to hit you with. Stand right in front of Radahn's meteor attack and just shrug it off like someone threw a paperclip at the back of your head. The initial activation of Warcry has a knockback radius that can clear the space around you, great against repelling dogs and imps and setting them up for a heavy attack. The recovery period ends long after the third wave, so you can time a jump attack with the third and final wave to break stances, deal damage, whatever your heart desires. Don't use the follow-up R2. The hitbox is broken, and from what I can tell, no one has any plans to fix it, so just do something else. If you're just trying to find a way to the next Grace and everything is 20 levels higher than you, throw this to bait out knights one at a time and then pick them off with a backstab. Put this on the Rusted Anchor and you'll look hilarious. I seriously just sat here and did almost 170 voice takes for each weapon skill on the list. If I missed one, just let me know in the comments and I'll pin a little thing or something and give a tip for it. I'm not going back. I'm not checking. Fuck you. Shut up. I'm not editing this again. Bye.